All right, good morning. How is everybody doing? All right. So we're going to get started. Um, and I want to start by saying thank you for coming to this session on green jobs. And I want to start also by appreciating the space that the Women Business Coalition has given us to host this discussion. And also, before I forget, I just want to thank everybody on the RMI team that has been working hard to get this together, including the influence team and our managing director for communications, Dina Capiello, over there. So thank you so much for you and your team for making this happen. So let me give some context about today's conversation. The title is Realizing the Green Jobs Promise in the Global South. It's a book that I'm writing, that I started writing in the summer. And it's a movie that is going to come in Christmas. But it's actually a conversation that doesn't happen often enough. If you go around the pavilions here, there is a lot of conversations around finance, technology, and people don't talk about people, interestingly enough. So today's discussion starts as the COP returns to Africa. We're very blessed to be hosted by Egypt these 2 weeks. And it is precisely in this continent and the rest of the Global South that many countries feel at a crossroads between choosing energy security and, jump on the net zero bandwagon. So it is at that crossroads where, in this current context that we're also facing food insecurity, high energy and food prices. And so lots of countries in the Global South are having, tough decisions to make. You would have heard in the corridors and maybe on some of the reports from the negotiations around the dash for gas. Now, it does happen that it is in the Global South that most of the people who don't have access to electricity actually leave. And so oftentimes the question is, what is the Global South transitioning out from when there isn't like energy access for up to 800 million people? Almost 80% of those people are actually in Africa, in one single continent. And so that's where it becomes a bit more hard. Now, leaving the bad news aside of lack of electricity, there's lots of opportunities around the energy transition as well. And as I mentioned before, oftentimes we don't talk about the benefits of the energy transition. And one clear one is jobs. We can call them green jobs. A recent report by the IEA last month actually highlighted that, in fact, clean energy employment has already taken over fossil fuel employment. So that's significant news. In addition, that report says that in the next 6-7 years, we will need to have up to 42 million clean energy employees in order to become net zero by 2050. That is a significant undertaking, especially because we know that today, that figure stands at 12 million. And so that means that we need to build up like about 30 million jobs in the next 6-7 years. How do we do that? I think I'm gonna move this way and sit down. So, because it's so hard to do that, that's why I'm having a very distinguished panel here to answer these tough questions of how we build the workforce of tomorrow. Particularly knowing that when we think about the energy transition, a lot of the jobs in clean energy are oftentimes not associated with the same benefits and compensation as fossil fuel industries, whether it's coal or oil and gas. In addition, there is another aspect of that that oftentimes we don't talk about, which is the equity part of it. Who are those jobs for? And we recognize that while women employment in the energy sector, clean energy sector, is actually higher than in fossil fuels, standing at 32% versus 21% in the oil and gas sector. There's still a lot of work to do to reach to parity. In addition, we know that Africa, as an example, is one continent that will host half of the youth of the world. And so that's a significant potential as well as a potential liability if we don't harness that. And so it is in the context of that today we're gathering to discuss about the current state of play of green jobs. We're also going to talk about the challenges around the energy transition, but also the opportunities, because there's lots of solutions out there. And it is for that purpose that we are gathering today with this very distinguished panel, which will be starting with opening remarks by a recent board member for RMI, Mr. Suman Sinya, who is the CEO of Renew Power, who will give us and started us with a conversation. He's now a new member of the Board of Trustees for RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute. We will also count with the participation of the CEO of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, Mr. Simon Harford. We're very blessed to have you here. We will also have somebody who is also close to the money, so starting with people with the money. We have Matthew Reddy, who is the Senior Private Sector Specialist at the Global Environment Facility. He has all the money in the world in his suitcase just next to his chair. And in order to access that money, well, not to access that money, but in order to implement some of those investments, we have two distinguished individuals. First of all, we have Anita Otubu, who just started as Senior Director at the Universal Energy Facility Sustainable Energy for All. Thank you. And then we also have an entrepreneur that it's actually the people that will bring the solutions on the ground. In Ms. Monica Maduekwe, she is the founder of Putru Technologies Limited. So this is the panel that we have. My name is Raul Alfaro-Pelico. I'm Senior Director in the Global South Program at Rocky Mountain Institute. And with that, let me hand you over to our opening remarks in the words of Mr. Sinya. Mr. Sinya.
Yeah, thank you for that, Raul, for your opening remarks. They touched on a lot of very important issues, and the one thing that struck sort of in my mind was that we don't talk enough about people. You're absolutely right. We actually don't. If you look at the topic that, apart from the energy transition, sort of, or as part of that, is talked about the most, is finance, right? And I think it misses the point on a couple of different dimensions. It misses the point, obviously, on people, which is, of course, critical to this whole transition. It impacts people. We need people to make the transition happen, just like we need finance, but we never talk about that. The other thing we never talk about enough is how difficult it actually is to implement and invest all this money. You know, it's one thing to just say on a piece of paper, invest trillions of dollars, and how can we get even bigger quadrillions of dollars in? But who's going to invest all this money? Where is it going to be invested? And for that also, you need people to actually take all this money and put it to work in the right way to give the right returns on the ground. And again, that's something that we don't actually talk about enough. So I'm glad that you guys are doing this conversation and this session on the people dimension, because I can tell you that, as I've grown our company, Renew Power, and for those of you who don't know about us that much, we are India's largest renewable energy company. We currently have a portfolio of about 13,000 megawatts, and we're only 11 years old. So we're not a very old company. And therefore, hiring people and putting them to work in the right way has been one of the most important challenges that I faced as an entrepreneur in building this company. And so this is a topic that is very important for me, and something that I have spent a lot of my time thinking about, and I think is absolutely critical to driving further growth of our business, and also that of the entire renewable energy sector, which is, of course, so critical for driving the energy transition itself. So I think if you dig down, it all comes down to, do we have the right people doing the right jobs in the right way? And just to give you all some basic numbers, India in its renewable energy industry right now probably employs about, and numbers are kind of hard to get a little bit, but between, let's say, 500,000 and 1 million people. Okay, so it's a bit of a broad range. Now, we currently have about 130 gigawatts of installed wind and solar capacity. That number is meant to increase by about 4 times in the next 8 to 9 years. So you would argue that we need at least that many more people to be sort of hired, trained, and deployed for us to be able to meet the challenge of delivering these numbers. And so therefore, you can argue that we need anything from 2 to 3 to 4 million additional people to join this sector. And I can tell you that today we are having a very hard time in finding the right people, because they're just not, our sector is a new one, so they're not trained in our sector. And so what is happening is that all the companies are hiring from each other. And so we just, somebody hires from me, I hire from them, we all hire from a third person, and it's all that it is doing is, it's driving salaries up, which is great for the people, of course. It's not great for us, obviously, because it means that our costs go up. And eventually, it's not good for the consumer because we have to pass on those higher costs to the end consumer as well. And eventually, at some point, we'll all run out of the ability of just hiring from each other, and capacity addition will actually stop. So before that happens, how do we address the problem and start sucking in or getting in a lot more people into our sector is really a very important point that we've been debating and discussing internally within our company. And there are two kinds of people we require. There's the one kind of person who is obviously at a more strategic level, more looking at various common functions, whether it's finance, accounting, strategy, marketing, etc. So we need those kinds of people who we can actually hire from other sectors as well. So we're beginning to pull in a lot of people from other sectors, that are now coming into us, and they require relatively at least some training on our sector, but then after that we can put them to work relatively soon. There's a second type of person that we require, which is really the people who are the engineers, the technicians, the manufacturing, the factory workers, etc., which are people actually that is very hard to get right now, because we don't have enough. If you dig down further, we don't have enough university programs that train these kinds of people. We don't have enough diploma programs. We don't have enough technical institutes that are really giving the training on in our sector on how to put up a solar plant or how to put up a wind farm or how to maintain it, and giving those kinds of technical inputs, how to measure the wind in a certain location, how to do the engineering and design. All of those there are not adequate amounts of courses in universities which are being taught from where we can then go and hire people. So to address the problem, what we are doing is, number one, we are actually starting to work quite collaboratively now with universities directly to make sure that they set up the kinds of programs that we require to get people that we can hire from them. So I think that's one thing that we're doing. But the second thing that we're also having to do is we're actually setting up our own learning academy right now, because we realize that as a market leader, it's our responsibility to actually get people into our sector, train them, and put them to work. So we're actually now in the process of setting up what we are calling a learning academy, but think of it as a university, where we'll actually have to now come up with our own programs and our own methods of hiring people, training them for a certain duration of time, certifying them, and then obviously putting them to work. Now, the thing that is likely to happen is that we'll end up becoming a poaching ground for other corporates to hire from us, because now we're the guys who are going to be doing all of this. But in some ways it's fine with us, because we feel that as a market leader, it's our responsibility to train people and in some ways service other corporates and the whole industry by providing people into the rest of the industry. The other thing that we're also looking at, beyond just the issue of getting trained people into our business, is we're also thinking about the transition aspects, which is how do we take care of people who are working today in the energy sector, but not necessarily, or other kinds of sectors, but not necessarily in our sector, and how do we sort of get them from there? So how do we get people who are working, let's say, in the coal industry or in some other industries, and then retrain them and then put them to work in our industry? So that's something that we are thinking about. We don't have a good view on that. I suspect that there is going to be a lot of resistance for people to leave their existing jobs and offer themselves up for retraining, because obviously if you're a person working in a coal industry, it's much easier for you to carry on doing that than to jump into something new which you don't understand as well. And the other problem is that in India, coal mining and the coal industry, it's really a government-owned industry. So a lot of people who work there, for them it's like government jobs which are for life, whereas jumping off into the private sector where things may go your direction or not, who knows? So there is that element of uncertainty from the Indian context standpoint, and I'm sure every country will have its own little nuances in some of these areas. But one of the programs that we're actually very proud of is that in the western part of India, in the state of Gujarat, you have what are called these salt pans, where salt is made by taking water from the sea and then drying it, and then you have to actually mine the salt from wherever it is. And there are women who work in these salt pans, and they earn only about 10,000 rupees a year, a full year, which by the way translates to about $150 in a year. That's how much they earn. And and it's seasonal work. They can only work for 6 months in a year, and it's very hard physical grinding labor because they actually have to go to where the salt is dried and then literally dig it out and then transport it long distances. So what we are doing is we're actually working with the United Nations Environment Program, and we're actually going to these women through an NGO, and we've developed a solar training program for these women. And we're now putting them through a solar program so that we can convert them into becoming solar technicians and then get them to start joining the solar industry. We're not giving them jobs per se ourselves, but the idea is to make them employment ready in our sector. And we've trained more than 1,000 such people already, and the idea is to continue this, to keep rolling this program forward. So this is actually a very sort of interesting thing that we've started, where the actual earnings power of these women actually goes up multifold, which allows them, of course, then to support their families. And the work that they do is obviously not as back-breaking and grinding. It's a very different kind of job. And so those kinds of programs we need to do more of so that we can actually get people sort of really become part of this whole just transition. The second thing that we're doing also is that we're working with actually the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and we've set up actually a women's entrepreneurship program in the renewable energy sector. So we're trying to identify women and help them on identifying opportunities in their neighborhoods and the local communities around the new sort of developing renewable energy sectors. One thing people don't realize is that our sector is actually becoming really, really large. And in terms of just investment, we are probably going to be one of the largest sectors, certainly in India going forward, and I'm sure the same thing will happen in other countries as well. So there are going to be a lot of ecosystem spin-off benefits and jobs that will emerge. And how we can actually then drive people to come into that is something that we're focusing on doing in this women's entrepreneurship program. So I think that's how we're thinking about the whole issue of jobs and how to make people more available for us in terms of the growth that we're going to see in this industry over the next many years. And we're also trying to focus on the transition aspects of this whole thing, because as we all know, that is absolutely critical. Let me stop here. Raul, thank you so much all for giving me the opportunity. Back to you, Raul.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singha. These are great insights. Thank you. From India, which I think they are really relevant across the global south. And I miss introducing one of our panelists today, Mrs. Met Lund from the International Labour Organization. I just felt we couldn't talk about green jobs without having ILO. You own that space, so I'm glad that you made it. And in fact, some of the insights that you just heard from India, which I think are applicable to South Asia, they're also relevant for the global south. Now, one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning of the panel, Mrs. Lund, is that we know the global figures for employment, right? ILO has been collaborating with IRENA for the past decade on the annual review of renewable energy jobs. As I mentioned, they are at the global level, but what is the state of play in the global south specifically?
Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm very sorry for being so late. To be honest, I couldn't find it, so so I'm very glad to be here, and I'm sorry that I missed the beginning. But thank you so much for inviting the ILO. We're very happy to be here, and as you say, the green jobs dimension of climate change is absolutely crucial. We know where we need to get at. The problem is that we don't want to create new challenges and inequalities as we are moving towards net zero. We in the ILO, we are normally talking about, so first of all, green jobs. I mean, green jobs, they can be green at the core. They're the classical kind of green jobs that you think about, but actually to a large extent, they will be more greening businesses, and they will be adding to green processes and improving the way that status quo is now, business as usual is now. So when we look at a global level, there is a positive narrative. We know that there will be created more jobs than there will be lost. But when we look at it at a sub-regional or a subnational level, there will be huge inequalities, and that is why we call for a just transition, right? Because we must be realistic about the challenges that we face and how we're going to tackle them. So when we talk about the new job opportunities that there are out there and how the climate change will change the labor market, we see primarily 4 different changes. One is, of course, jobs created. And as I said, we know that there is a positive narrative globally. If we implement the Paris Agreement, we will create 18 million net jobs. There will also be some jobs lost. It's not as many at all, and the majority of the job changes will actually be jobs that are either transformed or substituted. So if we look, for example, at the different regional levels, we know that most regions and most countries stand to win. There are some that would if you look at just the job numbers, stand to lose. And those are the countries that are already now heavily dependent on fossil fuels. So that would be, for example, in this case, the Middle East and North Africa and the Arab states. We in the ILO believe that that means that there is an even stronger incentive for being proactive. So as we are phasing out fossil fuels, then we have to invest in economic diversification, transition workers into other industries. And as I said, the good thing is that the majority of the change in the labor market will be in the jobs that are transformed or substituted, which means that there is a lot of mobility in the labor market. And what governments and workers and employers have to do is to facilitate that transition, because it's not always smooth transition to move from one job to another. Happy to speak more about how we can support that as well, but that is, there are, so to sum up, positive narrative, there are definitely challenges. Now I only spoke on regional levels and continents, but even when you look at subnational levels, where we will lose jobs are not necessarily where there will be jobs created.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Loon. I think this is a really good overview of the situation of the green job space. And you've already touched on some of the challenges, right? Oftentimes, one of them is, you know, it's not that you can find like-for-like jobs. If you are a coal miner, you may not be a renewable energy expert. So that's one of the challenges, but we're here to provide solutions as well, and that's why we have a panel of distinguished experts in this space. And I'm going to turn now to the Global Environment Facility. As you well know, the Global Environment Facility is one of the financial mechanisms of the Rio Conventions, oftentimes very much focused on public sector, right? However, you know, there is a significant experience in the private sector that Mr. Reddy is bringing to this conversation, particularly one that I like to hone in sort of like the private sector in Africa. And if we think about the just energy transition, if we think about productive use of energy, particularly in the agricultural sector, I wonder if you can share with us some insights on some of those challenges that the GEF is addressing.
Thank you, Raul. So Matthew Reddy, private sector specialist with the GEF. So the GEF's view is how we can use this energy transition to really foster a green economy and the cascading benefits that can be derived from our investments, for example, in African mini-grids. And I'll take the lens that Raul sort of started with is around youth. And there's probably a few COP veterans in this room. I've not seen youth present to the extent that I've seen youth present at this COP. It's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, every panel, it's elevated in the consciousness. There's that, possibly it's the busiest stand I've seen, is that youth stand. It's just a hotbed over there. And I was lucky enough to join their youth summit launch on Sunday. It was very interesting to hear what the young people had to say. They weren't coming at it from a perspective of, oh, we're going to be the victims of the effects of climate change. They're saying, invest in the youth because we're going to be delivering the solutions to climate change. If you want climate change solutions, start investing in the youth. And I thought, yeah, that's an extremely important point to bring to this discussion. And I think when we consider green jobs, yes, there are direct, I'm going to use words that the ILO might not, they might not be technically correct. For a lay person, this is how I understand the situation. So there are direct employment benefits, of course, you know, in rolling out renewables and mini-grids, for example. But really it's the cascading benefits that we're interested in, the Jeff, from an environmental perspective. So yes, there are direct green jobs, but then what does this electrification, the opportunities to participate in a digital economy mean for these communities, and especially in the case of entrepreneurship? And I want to sort of build on the comment that Sumat made around those ladies that were working in the salt pans. I mean, these are not just green jobs, these are quality green jobs. They require education, they require the facilitation of secondary industries. They need an ecosystem of collaboration. So, you know, this whole idea that these are green jobs, these are green quality jobs, and I would also add green and blue jobs, because so much work on mini-grids and so much work on renewables is applicable to small island developing states, the SIDS. So green and blue jobs, I think, are really important in this. And my sort of point coming from this is that this facilitates opportunities in the digital economy. You know, for us, we can do anything, you know, order cinema tickets, order food, book our accommodation, all of those things are done online. In the African context, of course, that can also mean, you know, access to weather information, the opportunity to access new markets for commodities. Electrification can mean better access to transport, where they're able to charge up two-wheeled electric vehicles, for example. We've seen some excellent examples of that in Guinea. So those are the types of things that the Jeff is interested in, is, yes, the direct benefits, but these whole flourishing green and blue economies that can then be derived from the access to electricity. And of course, from the youth perspective, this means that they don't have to travel to the cities. They don't have to move to access those kinds of jobs. They have their opportunities in their own community. So these are quality jobs, they're green and blue jobs, and they're local jobs. I'm probably running out of time here, but the CFAR Alliance is the best expression I've seen of this opportunity of entrepreneurship. And I know Monica's going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, but if you want to learn a little bit more about how the Jeff is working with the private sector, we're working with a range of investors and incubators, PayPal, MasterCard, some small-scale private equity investors. They're putting their money into blue economy jobs in East Africa. When I say East Africa, I mean Egypt right the way down to South Africa. They're taking fellows, 30 young people. Some of them don't even have, like, business experience. They've just got ideas and a willingness to collaborate. We're funding them to come together in an incubator to develop blue jobs that they can then get funding and resources for, and develop their own economic potential within their communities for environmental benefits, which is really where the Jeff comes in. And it's 50% women, 50% men. So we also like to think that, yes, these are green jobs, they're blue jobs, they're quality jobs, they're local jobs, and they bring gender equity and a just transition as well.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Those are great insights, and I like that you also touched on the youth, because I think we need to pay attention to, you know, who are those jobs for. You've also mentioned, as well as Mr. Sinya, women, and as you mentioned, in the panel we have an entrepreneur who actually has been dealing with the challenges of clean energy finance, but also developing solutions for that. Mrs. Monica Maduekwe, she is the founder of Putru Technologies Limited. Before that, she was an expert in the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, based in Cape Verde, in small islands, particularly those territories that are facing some of the challenges of climate change. In addition, as you mentioned, Matthew, women and girls are actually bearing the brunt of the climate crisis. In fact, they make up 80% of climate refugees. Now, you also mentioned, Matthew, victims, and we want to see that, you know, women are not just the victims, but also the provider of solutions. And so I wonder, Monica, if you can share with us some sort of like the challenges that you have faced in the clean energy space, clean energy finance space, and the solutions that you've brought about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raul. And I would like to also thank him for some of the mentions of what Jeff is doing, especially turning business ideas into commercially viable enterprises. That is very necessary, and this is something that traditional financiers are really not into, and these are some of the challenges that entrepreneurs face. Just a little bit about Put-Through. So Put-Through, as he mentioned, we're a technology company, and what we do is to leverage technology to fast-track access to funding for businesses, state-owned and privately owned business. And more importantly, we are very much focused on market engineering. As I was just sharing with you, of course, market engineering may have other definitions, but for us, it means creating energy demand for service providers to follow, and for investment and financing to be channeled to the service providers. As many of you may know, in Africa, there's a low energy demand, especially in West Africa. Low energy demand discourages investments, or it also makes projects to be more small ticket kind of investments, which traditional financiers are not very much attracted to. So for women-owned businesses, these challenges manifest in women having less access to capital. According to research, this is about 30% less likely to access credit compared to male-owned businesses. And the challenges are twofold. First, from what I've experienced, there's the market-specific related limitations on one end, and on the other end, there is the entrepreneur-specific limitations. So if we look at the market-specific limitations, I'm happy, Rahul, that you mentioned small island companies, countries, because where a business is domiciled also affects the capacity of entrepreneurs to access credit facilities. An example is that when you go to larger economies, for example, in Nigeria, you tend to see SMEs that are larger, the balance sheets are stronger, the capital market may not be as deep as what you see in South Africa. However, it's deeper compared to some other countries in West Africa. So SMEs in larger economies are more likely to access funding. And if you're a woman, then you're perhaps doing better than some women-owned SME in smaller economies where the capital markets are very shallow. So this is just one angle. Then concerning the entrepreneur-specific limitation, this concerns the business itself, the business owner, and we see situations whereby banks or traditional financiers are looking at audited financial statements that run for more than 3 years. They're looking at balance sheets that show profitability, liquidity. So they need to see that you also have strong financial models that show that your cash flow from this new investment is going to pay up for the new, for the funds you're asking. So it's very market-centric. And you're perhaps asking, doesn't this apply to male-owned businesses and female-owned businesses? But when you start looking into the sort of businesses that are accessing funding, then you see that there's a gender aspect to it, because in a clean energy sector, women-owned businesses tend to be fighting against, the flow, in the sense that they tend to operate in sectors that are not so impressive in scale. So women-owned businesses in our jurisdiction tend to focus on the distribution part of clean energy businesses. This is distributing solar kits, solar lanterns, cook stoves, which is very high impact. However, their market segment is focused on women and women in rural areas. And these people, or this group of customers, very important, but may not have the sort of purchasing power that the banks are excited about. So you see the sector, you see the scale, also fighting against a female entrepreneur, attracting funds. Then there's other part about speciality, her training. Does she have some technical training? And this is where the STEM issue comes in, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So even though you're a business person, you need to have some kind of training. But most women, or in our sector, we tend to see STEM to be very male-dominated. I will just conclude by saying, as far as job is concerned, we know that by empowering more women, women tend to employ more women or have gender diversified teams. So if we're talking about the job challenge for energy transition, then definitely it rests on really empowering women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really insightful, and thank you for sharing that dimension. I want to turn now this side of the panel, and you know, you've mentioned, Monica, South Africa, which is a country that Simon, you know very well. In fact, you just recently joined, nearly a year, you joined as CEO of GAP, coming from Impact Investment. So you've heard Monica talking about having perhaps 3 years worth of financial statements to be considered. You're barely making a year at GAP. What is the role of philanthropy in this space, particularly in the green job space? I mentioned that, but also I mentioned that in the context of what has happened in South Africa, coming out of COP26 with the Just Energy Transition Partnership Package, and also what we expect this year in COP27 with the attention being turned to Indonesia, another coal mining country. Any insights on that from the role of philanthropy, Simon?
Thank you, Raul. And there have been so many excellent points made already. I shall try and complement those. First of all, in terms of explaining GAP, it's the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. We were set up 1 year ago at COP26 by some major philanthropies, Rockefeller Foundation, IKEA Foundation, and the Jeff Bezos Earth Fund, in order to do two things. One of them is to help accelerate clean energy deployment in developing countries, either those that have carbonized, like South Africa, and we can help accelerate decarbonization, or for those that have not yet electrified fully, how can we help them electrify with clean energy rather than defaulting to fossil fuels? That is our sole purpose, and we have a total and utter focus on that. Since launch 12 months ago, we're now active operationally in approaching 19 countries. And so we're getting a whole load of learnings from that as to how we can make a difference to that agenda. Everything we do is working in partnership, so many of the organizations here, including RMI, are important partners of ours. And so to answer your question, we're trying to make sure that by bringing philanthropic capital, we're being additive to what others are bringing. It's not about the size of capital. That is going to come from the private sector and from the development finance world. So we look at the attributes we can bring, which are around the speed of how we can move, the flexibility of how we deploy our money, and going to areas that have no financial return and lend themselves to philanthropy. So the model is very much complementing others and working with others. Let me illustrate two examples of how we're trying to drive the jobs agenda, and I would echo everything that other speakers have said about how imperative this is. Just take Africa alone. Africa will soon have the world's largest working population of young working age people. There are simply not enough jobs of any nature, formal or informal, for them. So this is an existential issue, not just for Africa, but actually for the rest of the world. So I echo what others have said, that this must be front and center of everything we're doing with urgency and with scale. Let me look at the two sides of this. I'll actually start on the South African side, as you've suggested. That's an economy that already has systemically high unemployment and is going to be trying to shift its entire economy from coal to clean, and all the other sectors that get affected by that. We've been working very closely with the South African government since the beginning of this year to assist them to plan this. The planning is very, very important. It is complicated, and as others have touched on, to plan new jobs, not just in the direct green jobs, but all the associated new economy areas, whether it's agriculture or tourism or the supply chain. South Africa's trying to domesticate its supply chains correctly. So what does that look like up and down the supply chain? That requires some detailed research. We've been funding that with the Presidential Climate Commission and also trying to push it below the national level. This is a very localized issue, as people know. So the province and the municipalities and the local communities have to be involved in the planning of what those new economic pathways are. So that's one example of fast funding of the planning. What does a green economy look like? It's an easy phrase. It's a much harder bit of economic development work. The second one is for the ESCOM workers who are going to be displaced by the close down. Everyone knows the first plant being closed down is Komati. There's a pipeline of other plants being closed down. That creates real immediate need, not just for creating new pathways for those workers, but for all the communities affected. It has a ripple effect of the communities in which those workers live, and for the small businesses that have supported the coal plant. It has a significant knock-on effect. And if we collectively don't swiftly find ways to make this as a minimum neutral on the impact and preferably positive, the politics in South Africa will rightly say this is not going to work. And so the entire energy transition comes back to successfully creating new job pathways and solutions for the indirect jobs affected. So we've swiftly funded ESCOM to create a retraining facility for the first group of workers affected by the Komati close down. We've brought in a specialist renewable energy training company called Saratech. The first cohort of 500 workers are going through that between now and the end of the year. And we are trying to move fast to create evidence that this can be done, create some optimism that there are new pathways, create some proof points fast, and then to learn from that. Because if we all wait for perfection, there's no such thing. And secondly, the political support for this, particularly at a local community level, will evaporate. So that's one of the reasons we focus so much on speed. Otherwise, the whole transition plan will grind to a halt and lose its political support. So that's just some illustration of what we're doing very fast in South Africa. And as you touched on, we're also working with the government of Indonesia, similarly, and offering support to other governments who are focusing on this just jobs aspect of it. And if I may just briefly touch on the other part of this, which is off-grid renewables, because many of the earlier comments I could not agree more with about countries seeking to electrify with off-grid solutions, distributed renewables. We are also heavily involved in that in countries such as Nigeria, DRC, Myanmar, Haiti, and that is first of all the fastest way to get electricity access to people when the grid system is deficient, the government has not got the funds or the capacity to rapidly create grid solutions. We believe, like others, that we've got to accelerate off-grid solutions to reach not just any electricity, but affordable, reliable electricity to then unlock everything that others have spoken about. And I could not agree more with previous speakers, that it unlocks productive use. We have an equal focus in our work on the demand side of electricity as much as the supply. That is the only way to drive viable economic business models and to create sustainable solutions to electricity, not just grant-funded and sort of interim solutions. We have an equal focus on unleashing entrepreneurial activity with young people. This is fundamental to women's empowerment and livelihoods with small businesses and also to the youth, as was mentioned earlier. So I want to strongly support colleagues on the panel who've been making these points earlier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. No, it's great to see that there are solutions, additional finance solutions, particularly those that are faster. Speed is something that you will be hearing around here. And you've mentioned a couple of things that are important, which is informing the planning, and also, doing something about, the transition, which is workforce development. And you mentioned Nigeria, which is an example of a country that our next speaker actually has a significant experience. She just joined Sustainable Energy for All after running the Nigeria electrification project. And there has been quite a number of issues around jobs and workforce development. I wonder if you can share some of those with us so you can, complement the conversation.
Thank you, Raul. Good afternoon. Good morning. Is it morning or afternoon? Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, you're right. I used to head the Nigeria Electrification Project. It was a project funded by the World Bank and the African Development Bank with $550 million secured towards supporting private sector companies in the deployment of mini-grids and solar home systems in rural communities. The project management unit team was under the Rural Electrification Agency, which is a government agency. However, it was made up of at least 90% of consultants and 10% of civil servants. I think in best practice, the ideal situation would have been to have at least 50% consultants, 50% civil servants, so as to build capacity. Unfortunately, the Rural Electrification Agency didn't even have enough staff available to conduct core REA activities. And so it was not possible to have the civil servants sort of seconded to the project management unit to get that level of training that they would have been able to obtain from the consultants who were experienced that were working as part of the team. So that was an unfortunate situation, but at least the 10% that were there, I would like to say that they've been able to get a lot of knowledge, lots of skills and experience in the off-grid space, in raising finance, in working with private sector developers and the likes. However, what we were able to do in terms of building the workforce, maybe not from within the project management unit, but with regards to helping the mini-grid developers and solar home system companies, we made it a requirement to have at least 30% of the workforce be women. So we mandated that in order for you to benefit from the results-based financing facility that was provided under the NEP, you had to at least have 30% of your workforce being women in order to build capacity of women, right? In addition, under the program, we ensure that 180 female students who were benefiting under a subcomponent called the Energizing Education Program were trained in both the design and installation of captive solar hybrid power plants at the federal universities. This was another way of having females and youngsters. We spoke about young people being part of the process of achieving the energy transition plans that are being developed. And so we thought it was important to have them work alongside EPC contractors, mini-grid developers, watching them and also getting their hands dirty with regards to the design and installation of these power plants. What else can I say we did? I guess we could also speak to being intentional, at least in the project management unit, with regards to hiring young professionals, as well as females too. Unfortunately, a lot of people are looking for the experienced, even consultants, the experienced consultants. And you hear when people say, so you're asking for 10 years of experience, 15 years of experience. How do you get the experience if you don't get the opportunities, right? So just being able to acknowledge or identify potential, at least, right? This is an emerging sector. Not everybody knows it all. Even the seniors amongst us are still learning. So just being intentional about engaging youngsters, but young professionals, as well as females under the program. And I guess taking this to the Universal Energy Facility now, which is the facility I'm now heading under Sustainable Energy for All, I will be working with the team towards implementing projects within the programs that we have to ensure that there's training being conducted with regards to the civil servants, the public officers within the various countries that are benefiting under the various programs under Sustainable Energy for All, particularly because when we're talking about the energy transition plans, it will be the governments that will be implementing these plans. It's not private sector. Well, private sector in collaboration with governments, but governments will be driving these plans. So we will be, well, we'll be working to establish some projects to ensure that we are not just telling them what to do, but we're working with them, we're building capacity amongst the public officers who ultimately will be taking charge of ensuring that we reach the goals that are stipulated within these energy transition plans. I hope that all makes sense.
Thank you. It makes a lot of sense. And maybe if I can just ask the audience to give a round of applause to the panel here. Lots of challenges and also lots of solutions. But maybe we don't have all the answers to all the questions. And I wonder if, turning that to you all, if you have any sort of like pending questions, comments, suggestions. I've asked a couple of people here to come to break the ice, but this is open to everybody. Any comments, questions on the discussion so far? All right, 3 at the same time. I'm going to start with women. I'm going to be biased this time, so I'm going to go all the way here.
Hi, thank you all. It was a very interesting panel discussion, so thank you. I'm Trina Malik, and I'm the Vice President of Global Programs at the Institute for Sustainable Communities. And we work at the community level all throughout Asia and in the US, centering equity in all of our work. So I'm wondering what the community engagement is as far as going into the communities, understanding their needs, and then responding accordingly.
Thank you so much. Community engagement. Let's take just another question over here.
Hi, my name is Jide. I'm with Duke University, but I'm also from Nigeria as well. So my question actually goes to Simon with respect to jobs. And looking at NDC plans of many countries, you discover that jobs is always secondary. Nobody really cares about jobs. We talk about jobs as, oh, we're going to provide jobs. Except for South Africa, because we're working on JETP. So my question is, are we going to look back at revising most of these NDCs to actually incorporate jobs? Because it's almost all about, we're going to do it. But how to do it, it's not actually stated in the NDCs. Thank you.
Thanks. Jonathan Phillips, Director of the Energy Access Project at Duke. And Jide sort of stole my question, but maybe I'll just build on the NDC point. I mean, we talked a little bit about how, you know, at the project level or the organizational level, you can, you know, pull out programs that focus on youth or build participation with women. As we go to the NDC level, are there countries that you can give examples of or policies within NDCs that you know of that in some way highlight jobs? Because it does seem like the language that NDCs need to be in as much as greenhouse gas, you know, gigatons, right? Thanks. Great panel.
Thank you so much. Great questions too. And maybe we start with a community question here with you, Anita, and then turn to Simon for the NDC.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that question. The Universal Energy Facility, as I'd mentioned, is being implemented by SE for All, and I'm pleased to say it's funded by GIAP. So Simon, thanks for all the money. We will. So the Universal Energy Facility is not just concerned about increasing access, but concerned about ensuring that that access is being used productively. It's working towards ensuring that the consumers of this power, they are engaging in productive use activities. So whether it's electric grinders, millers, cold storage systems, whatever it is, whatever they can use to sort of generate revenue for themselves, not only just to be able to pay for the power that they're consuming, but to improve their own wellness, their own well-being, and I guess, yeah. So we require that the mini-grid developers and the solar home system companies work very closely with the end users towards ensuring that they're able to also build businesses for themselves. It's not just about empowering the private sector companies who are deploying the mini-grids and the solar home systems, but ensuring that there's a win-win situation. Everybody's sort of improving their economic capacities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let me start some comments on that and turn to my colleague here. Look, it's a great point. My sense is that previously, as NDCs have been developed, and indeed as sort of the climate change agenda and the decarbonisation agenda has been developed, it's been sort of over here, and you've had countries developing countries figuring out their economic development, their issues with poverty, with jobs and so on over here, and they've been disconnected. We feel strongly that they must be one and the same thing. And thankfully, I think there's a lot more voices, particularly this year, acknowledging that the countries who own naturally their own development agenda, their concerns with poverty, with jobs, with all their national priorities, how do we integrate clean energy into that? It's one and the same thing. So that clean energy is development, and development is clean energy. And we do see a shift towards that becoming more integrated. We firmly stand for that. We think that's the answer. Because if it's either or somehow contradicting or not connected, it will not work, certainly not as effectively. So let me give you some illustrations of that. I talked about the importance of planning. We spend a lot of time and funding support to governments to do more integrated planning, not just at the national level, but crucially at the subnational level. We're working with an integrated planning that brings us together. We're working with our partners at the Bezos Earth Fund, who do some more sort of upstream academic economic work, who they're funding multiple countries to refresh their economic planning consistent with their NDCs to achieve exactly this integration. So countries like India, Indonesia, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, and more are being funded to refresh their economic planning in a more integrated way. Secondly, in South Africa, many of you will know there's a presidential climate commission, which is a sort of a stakeholder big tent for society to both talk and seek to align around the energy transition. We think it is superb. And again, there's nothing perfect in life. They're doing an excellent job of creating this dialogue, which includes going into communities and affected workers, as well as organized labor, to get these discussions around how do we create alignment with all of this. We are strongly supporting them, funding them, helping them to deepen their research into the jobs implication. And certainly as we work with other countries around the world, we're recommending they consider a version of the Climate Commission that's suitable for their country. Because without that multi-stakeholder discussion, consensus, and sufficient alignment, we do not see this working well enough.
Thanks. I want to build on what Simon is saying here, because I think integrating the just transition, the jobs dimension, the skills dimension into NDCs is really important. And I agree, we're not seeing it as much as it should. I really agree with Simon here. You cannot address climate change or the environmental challenges that we face without also having the economic and the social dimension of it. But in 2015, there was one NDC that included just transition. Today, we see that 32 NDCs include just transition. We know that 67% of NDCs, they include either economic or social dimensions. I think it's like the percentages, 60% talk about both skills and jobs, 40% talk about skills, 20% say nothing at all about any of this. So there is, of course, a lot of room for improvement, but I think, as you're saying, the agenda is catching up. I think that's a really good thing, and I think the reason why it's been a challenge so far is because people like us here and in the room, it's not enough to just work with the Ministry of Environment to develop this. It has to be with the Ministry of Education and with the Ministry of Labor, etc., etc. And that's why it makes it really difficult, and that's why one of the core principles of just transition and the ILO guidelines for just transition is policy coherence. So this policy coherence, working together in committees, in commissions, etc., on this agenda is really important, because otherwise we have huge blind spots. I know we're running out of time, but you asked for specific examples, so I will just give a few. In addition to South Africa, we've been working with the BRICS countries on evaluating their NDCs on the just transition dimensions. And I just wanted to give a few examples of how you can address this in very different ways. So, for example, here in Egypt, so that's not a BRICS country, but let's start with Egypt. They call on improving living standards and empower youth for decent work, including through building skills. In China, they have a lot of focus on skills development and job creation, but in addition to that, they, for example, include in their indices a partnership amongst universities on STEM, skills, research, etc. In India, there is a particular focus on training and upskilling and upgrading of skills, and this I think is very interesting, the awareness creation and training of professionals. Because too often we think that this transition will only happen by the workers, but it's also the people in management and the skills that they have and the knowledge and understanding. So there are actually quite a few examples just within the BRICS. So even just looking at that, these countries and their indices is quite interesting. But as I said, we are seeing more and more indices including these dimensions, and it's definitely going the right way. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think we tried to answer to all the questions and solve the whole problem in 1 hour. We almost made it, but we just couldn't make it. But if you do have any other questions, and you know the panelists are here stepping out, and you can approach them. But thank you so much for your attention to this conversation, and also for our panelists here today for providing the state of play, you know, some of the challenges and plenty of solutions that just need to be upscaled. And so I hope you can join us in that effort. Thank you so much.